turn to Luke chapter 23. Forgiveness. It's a tough subject to tackle. It is tough because it requires us to be courageous enough to face the fear-filled places, the vulnerable places, and the places that need examination or re-examination. Places that we don't necessarily want to go to. Places that are hard to track. Forgiveness requires strength, and it is not a physical strength that we need, but an above the head kind of strength. Nathan Corral put it beautifully. The man who forgives is far stronger than the man who fights. Forgiveness. Forgiveness resides in a high place where the air is thin and where it can be hard to breathe. Forgiveness is like our spiritual Mount Everest. Most of us are afraid to climb. Some of us go halfway, and a few of us go all the way to conquer it. Today, we will be trekking and facing Mount Forgiveness. You see, many of us don't have a problem forgiving things at the bottom of the mountain, the smaller offenses, if we can call it that. They can still be hurtful and uncomfortable, but they're less challenging. They're easier to climb. The problem is when we get to the middle of the mountain kind of pain. In the higher parts of the mountain where it gets harder to climb, harder to breathe, harder to adjust your footing, thus harder to conquer. But we can only conquer what we are willing to climb. I believe that God wants us to conquer all the big mountains in our life, and there are quite a few. But one of the most important ones would be Mount Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a choice. It does not force, it invites. Kind of like our relationship with God. God doesn't force, and I totally get that. The truth is, who wants something if you have to force someone to give it to you? God doesn't force you to trust Him. He doesn't force you to seek Him. He doesn't force you to love Him, because again, if you have to force something, is it real? No. Then I don't want it. You see, God doesn't force us. He invites us to know Him. He invites us to walk with Him. He invites us to be in relationship with Him. He invites us to trust Him. He invites us to love Him. God wants us to give from a real place. He wants us to give of ourselves because we want to, never because we are forced to. And forgiveness requires that same invitation. And so here are a few questions to think about. Is forgiveness based on the offender giving you something? You know, something in exchange for what they took? Is there a threshold that needs to be reached in order for me to forgive, in order for you to forgive? In other words, a standard that needs to be met, an amount of tears that I need to see you shed, an amount of pain that I need to see you feel. If so, what is the threshold? What's the limit? Is it seeing them feel the same level of pain you felt? Why is there a threshold? Is it to test the sincerity, or is it payback, vengeance? And how about apologies? Apologies are supposed to do something. Do they always? Is it merely the word sorry that we're looking for, or sincere acknowledgement? Can you forgive without a sorry? And can someone be sorry without saying sorry? And when someone says that they're sorry, does it mean that they're always sorry? How do you know? Does denial of an offense re-offend you? And does denial of an offense mean that someone isn't sorry? Or can denial of an offense simply be the weight of shame? Does the offender hold your power to forgive? In other words, have you given your offender the power to produce forgiveness in your life? Is forgiveness freestanding? You know, without attachments, prerequisites, or a checklist. You got to do this, 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 and that. Is forgiveness an external force or an internal force? In other words, does it come from the outside in or from the inside out? And do you think forgiveness is making peace with the offender or making peace with yourself? Forgiveness. At some point or another, we will all struggle with forgiveness, but it is what we do with that struggle that is crucial. If we don't ask ourselves the important, hard questions, we don't get the important keys to unlock important doors, which are vital to our health and wholeness and vital to those around us. And if we're not careful, we will have a little Alcatraz of those who hurt us. By a show of hands, how many of you know what Alcatraz was? Excellent, quite a few of us. For those of us that don't know what Alcatraz was an island with a prison filled with notorious prisoners. And sometimes that's exactly what we do. We create an Alcatraz in our mind, an island, a place we imprison those we deemed notorious, those that severely hurt us. But what we fail to realize is that we're in that prison too. We're just the warden. But make no mistake, we must live in that prison in order to keep our prisoners alive so that they can serve their sentence. And in that prison, there is no rehabilitation, no growth, no healing, no light, and most importantly, no freedom. Forgiveness is one of our most challenging struggles. I know it was for me. There were some people I just couldn't bring myself to forgive, but God. And I believe that it is one of our most challenging struggles because it is one of the most chain-breaking, fruit-producing, and health-ensuring ability that we can possess. I promise you. There are certain levels in your life that you cannot get to until you break those chains. Because you won't have the ability to see certain revelations until there's certain revelations there that have to be seen and understood. Forgiveness is a life changer. I promise you it is. It transforms our lives, period. Now, I'd like to briefly clarify something. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two different things. And sometimes we confuse one with the other. Forgiveness is a release, and reconciliation is a relationship. They are completely different. In most cases of forgiveness, there is some form of reconciliation, as there should be. That is the peak. The truth is, reconciliation is the greatest manifestation of forgiveness, and it is a great healing force when it is healthy and possible. But there are cases in which it is not healthy or possible. Like Pastor John always says, God, your Father, has your very best interest at heart. That is a relationship that will never fail you. And having your best interest at heart is a crucial component of trust in any relationship. If I don't trust you, we can't be in a relationship. And so when we are in human relationships, it's important to know that someone has your best interest at heart and you have their best interest at heart. It's important to know that they will do right by you. Not perfectly, but they're a safe place. They're a place of protection, a place of refuge. It is not a place of pain, violations, deceit, and betrayal. A healthy relationship should never be toxic, hurtful, or damaging. That is not having your best interest at heart. Therefore, forgiveness and reconciliation are different. Reconciliation is based on trusting God and the individual. And sometimes you can no longer trust that someone has your best interest at heart. You no longer feel safe, and that's okay. So in those cases, there may not be reconciliation, but in all cases, turn and tell your neighbor, all cases, yes, there can be forgiveness. Why? Because forgiveness is based solely on trusting God. And we know that God is trustworthy. Now, with that clarified, it's important to understand something. You may have the intention of only forgiving and not reconciling for whatever reason. And I understand. Boy, do I understand. But God, forgiveness is the present. Dr. Fred Luskin wisely wrote, when we choose forgiveness, we release our past to heal our present. Forgiveness releases possibilities, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Life changing possibilities, and one of them can lead to reconciliation. So, even if it seems that reconciliation is not possible, with God, it most certainly is. All right, let's unleash the power of forgiveness. Today's message is titled Sustainable Forgiveness. a structure, to bear a burden or a charge, to endure without giving way or yielding, to keep up or keep going in the process, to supply the necessities of life, and to provide for the ability to thrive and reproduce. A lot of us don't think about forgiveness as something that we should be reproducing, but it most certainly is. So the question today is, does your forgiveness have sustainability? In other words, does your forgiveness have the ability to supply the basic necessities for a healthy life? Do you reproduce forgiveness? Are you able not only to thrive in your forgiveness, but to pass it on to others? Or does forgiveness die with you? Is it unsustainable? Does it give way? Does it quit? Is there a limit to your forgiveness? Is it unable to bear up, unable to keep going in the process? And so the follow-up question is, how can we have forgiveness with sustainability, with the capacity to endure, with the ability to hold and bear up the weight because it is weighty? How can our forgiveness not just survive, but thrive? Here is the important factor. In order for anything to be sustainable, the source must be reliable. Woo! The source must be reliable. That's a message in of itself. Reliable. The only way that we can have the ability to sustain, reproduce, and grow in forgiveness is through Him who creates it. And do you believe that God created forgiveness? Sure. Then He must be your one and only source for it, because He is a reliable source. Our primary problem lies in who our source has been or is. And that can change monthly, weekly, daily, or hourly. Sometimes it's our flesh or our unhealthy influences, and the list goes on and on. Listen, sometimes there are well-meaning people, and sometimes there aren't. You may go to someone to vent or to look for justification, which, by the way, is not the healthiest response in the first place. But the next thing you know, they're pouring unsustainable, ungodly approaches to your situation. Unforgiveness can be learned. Actually, unforgiveness can be contagious. You may have gone to someone that has never been able to forgive anything above the bottom of the mountain. Someone that has never been able to conquer forgiveness at a higher level, and listen carefully, nor do they aspire to. Who do they aspire to be? We've got to check, does that align with my values and who I aspire to be? And so when someone can't give you help in that area, it is because they have leaned on their flesh. Their forgiveness is at a natural level. And so you cannot go to them for the supernatural. You see, it's important to understand something. Don't ask a bitter person how to get better. Woo! Don't ask a bitter person how to get better. The truth is, when we're unable to forgive, it is usually because we have relied on a powerless source. Powerless. Unsustainable source, something other than God. And that something is usually people, including ourselves. And if we are to tackle Mount Forgiveness, our one and only philosophy, goal, and mantra must be Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And we want to put a spin on it, equals everything. He must be our one and only source. The maker of forgiveness must be our teacher of forgiveness. You see, God may send people, sure, but he will never send someone that has not sought him, that has not sat with him, that has a hard time being obedient to him, that has not received from him. God will not send you someone to help you with something that they cannot conquer themselves. And it's not that they have not, but that they cannot, simply because they will not. Some people will unforgiveness. And so we must be extremely careful and selective with whom we trek Mount Forgiveness with. Don't ask Bitter Betty. She can't help you. Bitter Betty is wrapped up in all her chains of anger. Bitter Betty don't know how to be sweet. On a serious note, forgiveness is a life changer, and we must take it seriously. I believe one of the reasons forgiveness is often missed is because we tend to think that forgiveness is an act and not a process. And so when it doesn't happen in an instant, we get discouraged. We default back to a toxic mindset and we end up giving up on the process. We believe the feeling, but not the healing. Some people want to think that sustainable forgiveness is a teleport, quick and instantaneous, kind of like Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty. Nah, it's more like, help me face the process, Scotty. Sustainable forgiveness is not a place that you transport to. It is a place that you must walk to. And it's a long walk. You must intentionally take the steps and go through the process. Here's why: because forgiveness is not a move, it's a movement. The danger with unforgiveness is that when we don't go through the process, it will bring out the worst in you. The good news is that the opposite stands very true. When we go through the process of forgiveness, it will bring out the best in you. I'd like us to take a look at the etymology of the word forgive. Forgive is derived from the Old English word forgiven. Forgiven. For means completely, and giffen means to give or give up. So together it means to completely give up. In other words, give it up completely. You notice the up? Give it to something higher than you. God can do much better with it, whatever your it is, than we can. God can do much better with our hurt and our battles than we can. And this is some of the ways that we get tripped up. We respond in the natural. And you want to know what our natural wants to do? Some of you are laughing because you know. It brought out the nasty in you, right? The natural wants to punish, collect, and repay that hurt. When we get hurt, we don't want to give it up because we want to take down who or what hurt us. It's on now. I'm taking you down. And I understand. We all want to self-protect. But sometimes we self-protect in self-destructive ways. It's something we always need to be cognizant of. And so when we try to take it down, that's exactly what we do. We go down. We behave in our lower beings. It's important for us to recognize that forgiveness is not a natural act. It does not come natural to us. Forgiveness is a supernatural act. It's an act of the Spirit. So we can't look for forgiveness in the natural, because when we go to look for forgiveness in the natural, we'll get a natural result, a flesh result, which is decay and death. I promise you on this one, if you try to go natural, it is unsustainable. And it's funny because our natural tendencies to offense is a lot like Peter's. Let's take a look at how Peter wanted to handle forgiveness. Matthew 18:21-22. Then Peter came to him, our Lord Jesus, and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Peter's cute. Someone or some people obviously irked Peter quite a few times. And Peter wanted to justify his desire to respond in the natural with limits, cutoffs, unsustainability. Peter wanted to stop forgiving after 7 times. And at some point or another, we have all been a Peter. We want to say, no more forgiveness for you. But Jesus responds with, no. Forgive 70 times 7. Now, Jesus isn't telling us to forgive 490 times. Biblically, 70 times 7 means completely. There goes that word again. Completely. The whole. Listen carefully. As many times as it takes for wholeness. As many times as it takes for you to be whole. As many times as it takes for your offender to be whole. Oh, snap. And giving it up completely means that you cannot give 25% of it. We do that too. You cannot give 50% of it, 3/4 of it. You cannot say to God, God, here, I give you this 50%, and I'm going to deal with this 50% right up in here. It means you give 100%, the whole of the pieces, so God can give it back to you whole. It is much better in your hands, Lord, than in mine. I'd like us to take a look at the definition of super. You know, the super to our natural. Super. Something superior in quality, grade, and size, of the highest degree, of the highest power, of an extreme or excessive degree, to be placed, and here's my favorite, or be placed above something. Whew! Sounds a lot like God. So when you give it up completely to God, it will come back with a super attached on it. You'll be able to do things beyond the natural. What you'll be able to produce will be supernatural, kind of like a superhero. You'll have super grace, super strength, super understanding, and super love. Because the truth is, anything that goes up to God will come back with his touch, with his character, and with his power. Your response will not be natural because it is not natural. It will be superior in quality, grade, and size. It will be an extraordinary response, a remarkable response, and an exceptional emotional response. Why? Because it will have the power to go above all. And all means all. It will go above all of the offense. It will go above all of the betrayal, above all of the abuse, above all of the violation, above all of the loss, above all of the abandonment, above all of the words you spoke to me, above all of the lies you spread about me, above all the ways you didn't consider me, above all the ways you didn't value me, above all the ways you laid me to waste, above all the ways you hurt my loved ones, above all the ways you sought to destroy me, above all the ways you sold out, above all the ways you tried to sell me out, above all the ways you threw me in the pit, above all the ways on all the wounds that you inflicted upon me, it will go above it all of it. Earlier, I asked the question, is forgiveness external or internal? And this is another area in which we lose our footing. Many of us intuitively understand that forgiveness is an internal force. However, we still seem to look for forgiveness in the external. Why? Probably because the loss, the offense, the violation, or the hurt came from something external. So we keep turning to the external things. Sometimes we go back to the crash site and try to get healing there. We go back to the crash site and try to get what we lost there. Even though the event, if we can call it that, came from something external, the process is 1,000% internal. Unfortunately, a lot of times we go out and try to go up to God, but you must go in order to go up to God. There is no way up but in. And here's something else that's important in this process, and in quite a few processes. It's okay to grieve. It's okay. You can shed some tears. I've shed myself quite a few. It doesn't mean that when you're working on forgiveness, you won't have feelings. You know, I'm good. We armor up. And that's a sure way in trying to self-protect that you self-destruct. Because if nothing goes out, you can be sure that nothing good is coming in. The process does not mean that you're not allowed to feel and wrestle with pain. The process doesn't mean that you play pretend. You can't pretend healing. You can't pretend growth. You can't Botox this. You got to be real. The process doesn't mean that you didn't feel the wound, that you didn't look at it, and that you didn't acknowledge it. How can you recover from something that you refuse to uncover? It's the very opposite. It means that you did. You were courageous enough to work through it. You were humble enough and vulnerable enough to be made well. You sat with it. You acknowledged it. You removed its power from it, and you can only remove its power from it when you sit with that bad boy. You did not ignore it, nor did you stay in it, nor were you imprisoned by it. No, you trekked that mountain. You went up there where the air was thin and where it was hard to get a grip at times. And yes, sometimes I found it hard to breathe. But I conquered Mount Forgiveness. I put a flag on it. Have you all found Luke chapter 23 yet? Good. I'd like us to look at our Creator and the Creator of forgiveness. Let's see what Jesus did when the air was thin and he found it hard to breathe. Luke 23:34. Then Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. For they do not know what they do. And they divided his garments and cast lots. We can just sit quietly on that. Wow. Jesus was just whipped, beaten, and nailed to a cross. And this is what he chose to focus on? Forgiving those that whipped, beat, and nailed him to that cross? I believe there are two ways in which you can see the true heart of a man or a woman. Never failed me. If you ever want to know, listen carefully. Two ways you can see the true source of a man or a woman. Number one, in fire. Number two, in power. And this is a message in of itself, but I'm going to touch on it a bit. I always say, if you want to see a person's heart, give them power. Go ahead. Give it to them. Go ahead. Worst case scenario, you're going to get your heart torn up, ripped up, torn out. Like I said, I had my fair share of crying. But our God is a great mender. He's a great mender. Best case scenario, you filtered out the devils around you. If you want to see a person's heart, give them power. What do they do with that power? Do they help or do they hurt? Do they divide or do they unite? Do they abuse or are they grateful? Do they seek to break or do they seek to make whole? Do they do right by it or do they do wrong by it? You see, we all have power every single day, every hour, every moment. We have the power to gossip and tear people down, or we have the power to defend and lift people up. We have the power to be mean or the power to be kind, the power to judge or to understand, the power to prefer someone else or to prefer yourself, the power to assume the worst about somebody or believe the best in them. In essence, to do good or to do bad. What a person does with whatever power they have reveals their source. Because you cannot give from what you are not drawing from. You can only give from whatever you're drawing from. That is why I always say, sometimes it's sad to see people that say that they're Christians. You cannot, sorry, you ain't drawing from my God, my good God. That's some evil stuff you're doing up in there. The second revealer is fire. Fire. How a person handles hurt, offense, and conflict when they're being pushed, pulled, and torn will reveal their source. Are they trying to harm, hurt, and damage people, or are they seeking to heal? Are they seeking health and wholeness? Are they trying to mend, or are they trying to break? The bottom line is it mean-spirited or does a godly spirit reveal itself? Because the truth is, it is not about doing good in convenience. It's about doing good in conflict. It's not about doing good when it's easy. It's about doing good when it's hard. It's not about doing good when you understand. It's about doing good when you don't understand. It's not about doing good when things are heavenly. They're already heavenly. It's about doing good right in the midst of hell. Power or fire equals the revelation of your source. It will reveal one's root, again, of whom they draw from. So let's look at the source of our source. Here is our Lord Jesus being unjustly attacked, slandered, beaten, and in the midst of crucifixion. And what does he do? Now, Jesus had both the power and the fire happening to him simultaneously. He was in the fire, but make no mistake, he had the power. He could have called thousands of angels to wipe every single one of them out right there, but he didn't. He didn't. He didn't. And it wasn't that he couldn't. That's what people confuse sometimes when they see someone stay a little quiet. You throwing little tiny little water balloons, and I got all this up in here. Okay? That I could lay you out. But I don't. It wasn't that he couldn't. It was that he chose not to. Why? Because he never lost his source. Jesus was able to bear the burden, to endure without yielding, to keep going in the process, to supply the necessities for our life. He was in the fire, but he never lost his character. He was in the fire, but he never lost his goodness. Right in the fire, he prayed for the very people that put him there. Right in the fire, he didn't intercede for himself. He interceded for them. Sustainable forgiveness. Sustainable forgiveness. Can you do that? Can you step outside of yourself? Can you step outside of your hurt so that you can truly heal? And so that you can be a part of someone else's healing, including your offenders. Are you going to look for vengeance or godly victory? When presented with power or fire, will you lose yourself? Or will you show up bigger, kinder, stronger, and good? There's one more very important part of what Jesus said that I'd like you to always remember, especially when you're in that hard place. Did you notice that Jesus asked God to forgive? For they do not know what they do. And I know most of us would say, what did Jesus mean? They knew exactly what they were doing. And yes, in a fleshly perspective, they knew they were killing someone. But Jesus appeals to the unseen things, the areas in which we do not know what we are doing, and there are many. In the areas in which we respond in pain, in brokenness, in learned behaviors, in ignorance, in any form of lack. Lack is dangerous. You see, you don't lack anything, but if you believe the devil and you believe that you do lack something, dangerous. One of the important aspects of sustainable forgiveness is knowing that you first have received from your source, therefore God makes you a resource. If you cannot acknowledge that you needed forgiveness too and indeed received it, then you cannot give it. Again, you cannot give what you do not have. And if you do not have that understanding, you cannot give that understanding. Here's the side note. Some of us have been unable to forgive ourselves. And we need to stop beating ourselves up. Stop. Stop. Understand that Jesus paid it all. His blood was sufficient then. His blood is sufficient now. And his blood will forever be sufficient. There is nothing that you've done or have not done that his blood could not buy back. You need to have some self-compassion, some self-kindness, some self-love. You deserve to love yourself. Yes, I said you deserve it. You have a right to love yourself. You have a right to be whole. Don't let the devil shame you and say, listen, there's no shame in healing. There's no shame in healing. That was then, this is now. Be in the now. And then there are some of us that think we didn't need forgiveness. We got to address the Pharisees. We love them too. They think they didn't need forgiveness because they were perfect. I never did anything. They have a disease, the Pharisee syndrome, self-deception. I call it ego-sinitis. And ego-sinitis can be very deadly to you and everyone around you and to the things around you, but it is 100% curable. If you happen to have ego-sinitis, here's the bad news. You've got some more climbing to do than most of us because you got to get over that mountain of your ego before you can get to the next one. But here's the good news. You don't have to keep lying to yourself. You don't have to keep fearing whatever it is that you're fearing. You don't have to keep hiding behind your ego. There is no such thing as a superhuman, just a super God. Freedom feels good, and you have a right to be free. Free of your ego, free. And this is for all of us. You must first receive that Jesus interceded for you and those things for which you did not know. For the places that you were abandoned, for the things you needed and sought to fulfill on your own. He interceded for your pain. He interceded for your failures. He interceded for your mistakes. He interceded for your behaviors. He interceded for your lack. We must receive that first. Then you can give what you possess to others. Ooh, this next one. Not a lot of people are ready for this, but our Epic Church family is. You know, I get joy. It is part of my calling. I love wholeness. I love to see when people break through and break free. I love to see when they whoop up on the devil. When I'm like, go, fight that thing that's been keeping you captive. Go, do it. It feels so good when I see someone be their best them, including my offenders. A major part of forgiveness is believing that not only you can come out of the other side a better person because you can, but it is also believing that the other person can come out of the other side a better person because they can too. Forgiveness is not about believing in the things someone did wrong. It is about believing in all the good things that they can do right. It is believing that God gives us the ability to have a grace that is greater than the violation, greater than the anger, greater than the hurt, greater than the loss. It is understanding that as you give it up completely, you are trusting God to do with it what you cannot do. You are trusting God to return it back to you with a super attached to it so that you can have a supernatural response. And I don't know what someone or some people may have done to you. But I do know this. We have all been hurt. Severely hurt. But it is not about vengeance, it's about victory. And so if I can look beyond my pain and pray for yours, if I can get beyond my hurt and pray for yours, if I can get beyond my captivities and pray for yours, if I can get beyond my wounded ego and pray for yours, if I can get beyond my fears and pray for yours, if I can get beyond my brokenness and pray for yours, if I don't just pray for my own healing, but yours, then I think we won. We won. We won. Devil, you didn't get your way. God wins up in here. It may have taken us a little bit, but we got there. Because now I can see you. Not what you did, not bara, you. I can see you, and you can see me. I can see the human you, and you can see the human me. I can actually see myself in you, and you can see you in me. And most importantly, I can see that Christ died for you too. And because I can see you now, I am free. And because I am free, I can now free you. Sustainable forgiveness. Amen? So be it.